Part 1 of 3. The Echo Chamber Beneath Papoose. The desert at night is a rumor. Heat unhooks itself from the stones, stars idle like watchmen, and the wind drags secrets from one ridge to another without ever saying them out loud. I learned to listen there, to the gaps between the cicadas, to the way silence thins just before a helicopter carves it open, to how fear has its own frequency. People ask why I didn't run, why I didn't burn everything and forget. Truth is, by the time you hear the rumor clearly, you're already inside it. My name is Kent Hale, and for a long time all I had was a badge that opened doors and a promise I made to a younger version of myself. I told that kid we would do real science one day, not the taught kind that ends at the back of a textbook, but the kind that walks barefoot into the dark and bumps its shin on something the world doesn't have a word for yet. I did not promise him safety. I forgot to promise him sleep. I signed my non-disclosures on a Wednesday because someone somewhere believed people make fewer mistakes midweek. I was driven in a bus with smoked windows from a hangar near Groom Lake to a notch of land that didn't exist on any map I had ever been allowed to own. The driver kept the cabin so cold the air felt clinically clean. No one spoke. We were 8 strangers carrying the polite silence of people who suspect they are accomplices to something they haven't done yet. We left the bus inside the mountain. The walls were concrete pretending to be rock, then rock pretending to be concrete. The hallways were too narrow for comfort and too well lit to be honest. The first door recognized the badge, the second recognized the hand, the third took a sip of my breath and made a decision I was not invited to witness. Past that the air changed, gained weight like we were underwater. The hair along my arms lifted, as if warned by a storm still thinking about it. They called the program Sangeles because something about it spilled wrong when tipped. The director, a woman with a smile like a crease in a sealed envelope, showed us the brief. Compartmentalization, rotational isolation, zero cross-pollination. She said it all like a lullaby. She told us there were 9 objects on site, and a 10th described only in memos that never agreed with each other. She called them artifacts because machines imply intent and relics imply religion. Artifacts just sit there and refuse to be understood. I never saw 9. I saw one, and once was too many. We called it the Bell for lack of a better word, and because no one wanted to say ship. It was not a saucer. It was a pear-shaped absence of explanation, matte when you looked straight on, oily when you looked from the corner of your eye, as if it preferred to be noticed by accident. It rested on 3 supports that looked like they had unfolded rather than been built. There were no seams, no rivets, no heat scars. If it had flown, it had not suffered to do so. Our job was not to make it fly. Our job was to understand why the room changed when it woke up. The bell did not hum so much as edit the space around itself. Turn the field on, and the room forgot how to weigh things properly. A screwdriver felt lighter until you tried to drop it, and then it didn't fall so much as surrender. Fluorescent tubes bowed a fraction of a degree toward the thing, embarrassed to admit they were affected. Time did what time does when it realizes it has company. It became shy. Our clocks drifted, not forward or back, but outward, as if the second hand discovered it could take a wider circle. We were told there was a fuel plate inside the core, something denser than reason. We were told never to touch it, never to aim it, never to bring magnets or pride within 6 feet of the array. The control stack was a language disguised as geometry. 3 rings nested like diagrams of a secret, 12 tiles around the inner rim, each tile a different way to bend the same rule. We were given names for them, aperture, cascade, pitch, but the names did not help. I worked in a room next door to the room that mattered. That is how it works. You can stand close enough to something impossible to smell how clean it is, and still they keep you one door away. My console mapped the pressure nodes when the field came on and off. The pattern changed nightly, like a heartbeat learning a song. Someone in metallurgy kept bringing us plates that shrugged off tooling. Someone in human factors kept asking if our dreams contained stairs. On Thursdays, they raised the ceiling. That is a sentence that asks you to believe too much, but we lived quietly insane. The bell would activate and the floor's anchor load would climb, but the pressure above our heads relaxed, and panels that the eye swore were still bolted found a way to inch higher. Somewhere there was a number to describe this. We chased it like junior detectives who hadn't earned the right to carry a notebook. One night the director stopped by my console and said, "You'll see something new on the next cycle, Mr. Hale. Please keep your language dry, dry like paper, dry like evidence." When the field engaged, the pressure nodes knotted into a braid I had not seen. The air trembled, no sound, just a thought about sound. The bell tilted, casually, like a mind leaning toward an idea. It did not lift. It chose a direction and preferred it. Later, in the canteen where the coffee was always weak and the cameras always alert, a man I had never been introduced to sat across from me and said, "If they built it, they didn't build it for hands." He stirred his cup without looking. We keep asking what button to press. It may not know what a button is. Then he stood, left his coffee untouched, and walked away with the practiced inconsequence of someone who isn't supposed to exist. Security lived in the walls. You could feel it watch you write your name and wonder if you'd spelled it right. They didn't threaten, they reminded. Safety briefings began to include phrases like psychophysiological spillover and non-local cognitive proximity. We signed a new form every week that said we understood the previous forms had never been seen. I started to keep my own notes in my head, a ledger of impressions whose only proof was the way my pulse refused to be ordinary. The first accident wasn't mine. A technician in Bay 4 carried a torque wrench into the field when the rings were at half power. The wrench leaped from his hand with the eagerness of a dog that has heard its name. He went after it because habit is stronger than policy. They hit the kill, and the room snapped back like wet canvas. He stood there with his sleeve torn and his eyes too wide, mouth making slow shapes around a word that took him a week to finish. Later, he sat in the canteen, stirring nothing, the spoon hanging 4 degrees left of vertical without touching the cup. I called my wife from the parking lot that night and told her we should leave Nevada. I did not tell her why because I loved her, and love is a way to keep people far from the story. She asked if I was in trouble. I said trouble was a fence put there so you know where not to look. I said I was fine. I wasn't. I went home and listened to the refrigerator's motor and counted how long each cycle lasted and discovered it no longer obeyed itself. 3 weeks later, I broke a rule you cannot glue back together. It wasn't heroism. It was a clumsy kind of fear that wants witnesses. My neighbor, Naomi, the sort of friend you acquire by sharing a fence and a habit of noticing the moon, had seen the buses. She'd seen the way they arrived on no schedule any calendar recognized. She asked me if I worked nights or if the nights worked me. I laughed in a shape that wasn't laughter. We drove out to the scrubland near Papoose and sat on a ridge where the ground wears old footprints like thin bracelets. She had a pair of binoculars older than both of us. I had a stomach that regretted its loyalty. The sky over the mountain was loyal to nothing. Stars held their breath. The air waited for a name to be spoken. And then the dark learned a trick. A pearl of absence appeared above the ridge, A bead the mind kept trying to convert into a light and failing. It did not shine. It subtracted. It moved the way a thought changes direction, when it realizes it is not alone. Naomi breathed, "What is that?" And I told her nothing because a word would have been a betrayal. The pearl widened and narrowed, not like a lung but like an aperture. All at once the ground near our boots lost interest in weight. The dust forgot it had to settle. The hair on our arms rose and leaned. I could feel the back of my teeth. Naomi reached for my hand as if we were in church and a hymn had just remembered who it was about. Then the world hiccuped. Not forward, not back, some new tiny wobble that didn't belong to the axes we know. When it finished, there were fresh tire tracks on the plain that did not lead to where they began. We were not alone. A truck idled without lights 100 yards off. The kind of truck that has a permit to be everywhere you're not. The wind carried the smell of coolant and certainty. Naomi squeezed my hand and said, "Tell me this is a joke." I said, "I don't think we're the punchline." The pearl tightened to a needle's head and then decided it had always been gone. The truck did not move. The desert pretended it had always been empty, the way a room behaves when you return to it after confiding in it. I did not sleep. I went back to work with a new animal in my chest, the kind that paces even when it's tired. The bell looked the same. The tiles around the ring wore their indifferent symbols. The director wore a scent that admitted to nothing. She called us to a briefing and asked us, sweetly, to keep our hobbies indoors. The slide she didn't put on the screen was the one with our names on it. She did not need the slide. That afternoon, I found a note in my locker, handwritten on paper that had lived in a pocket too long. It said in a courier's tidy impatience, "Wednesday 22:15, gravity window, don't stand under IT." It was not signed. The only other thing in the locker was a pair of earplugs and a prayer I was suddenly too proud to remember. Wednesday, we shifted the bell to an orientation no one had bothered to name yet. The rings climbed to 70%. The room thinned. The cameras watched us watch our instruments. At 22:14, the tiles on the inner ring brightened like painted stone, discovering it could blush. At 22:15, the floor emitter from the support struts made a noise that did not sound like a noise, more like the tape hiss behind a voice you love. The air above that square glittered with dust that wasn't dust, particles too obedient to be wild. I remembered the note and moved 2 steps right. A bolt on the tool cart slid over the line into the glitter and fell in slow motion up. It rose. Not fast. With the dignity of an old elevator. It reached a height that did not look like a height so much as a decision not to be close to us, and then it stopped, not because a force had opposed it, but because the idea had completed itself. Someone gasped. Someone said a word you only say when you're very young or very lost. The director's voice on the intercom was calm and genealogy flat. "We will be shutting down in 3, 2. The bolt fell back into a world that had decided quickly to agree with itself again. It hit the floor like it was embarrassed by all the attention. The room exhaled. The rings glowed less. My console drew curves that looked like a hand, trying to remember how to write its own name. In the canteen, Naomi waited for me. That sentence shouldn't exist. She didn't have a badge, didn't have the kinds of friends who give you one. But there she was, hair tucked into a cap, wearing the uniform of a contractor whose name patch had been cleverly scuffed blank, eyes wide with that same church hymn severity. She didn't smile. She just tilted her head toward the hallway and said, "You're going to tell me everything you can say without getting me killed, and then we're going to decide whether you can live with not saying the rest." We didn't make it to the hallway. The director's smile intercepted us, envelope crease sharp. Security materialized as if conjured by the scent of a rule. Naomi's fake name peeled itself off her chest with a sticky little sigh of regret. The director looked at me the way a mother looks at the drawer where she keeps the knives. "Mr. Hale," she said, "do you know the difference between a secret and a silence?" I tried to say yes. The room asked me to reconsider. The director gestured, and the corridor's far door opened, for us or at us, I couldn't tell. "A secret," she said, walking, "is a burden you carry. A silence is a shape you make in the world to keep the wind from getting in. We practice the latter here." They separated us with the efficiency of people who have built a life out of separating. Naomi disappeared into a room that swallowed her name. I was guided into a chair that had known too many apologies. The man who sat opposite me wore the kind of face that has studied mirrors so long it no longer trusts them. He laid a file on the table. Inside, photographs of my house at hours I wasn't home. Receipts from a diner I didn't remember eating in. A screenshot of my phone's lock screen with a missed call from a number I'd never dialed. He wasn't threatening me. He was building my silence. "I need you to understand the shape we require," he said, and he smiled as if that were a kindness. "You are very close to a truth that will not survive you if you mishandle it." I asked him a question I hadn't planned to ask. "Whose truth is it?" He looked genuinely pleased. "Oh," he said softly, "you're almost ready to be useful." They sent me home without punishment, which was a punishment. The desert waited outside my window, like a dog that knows you've learned a dangerous word. I lay on the couch and listened to the house pretend to be ordinary. At 2 in the morning, the refrigerator exhaled the way it always did, except now the motor's pitch held a beat too long, a shy second like the memory of that bolt pausing midair. I understood that the rumor had moved in. The next morning, a courier left a small package on my porch, a disposable phone sealed in a foil bag, and a note that said simply, "Tell the truth carefully." I didn't need to ask from whom. Secrets sign their letters by the weight they put in your hand. I turned the phone over and over until the battery icon pulsed like a resting heart. Then I hid it where I hide the parts of myself that still want the world to be brave enough to hear what I have to say. That afternoon, as I drove past the edge of the restricted land toward a sky that had never in its life asked my permission to be infinite, I realized two incompatible things were true. First, I had no plan. Second, I was already inside one,